positioned as
optional is another,
but it isn't into the quote-unquote,
and this might be
the niche killer.
Hanging low while I pop a bottle off of ya. Chain swinging, clang clang, and it costs a lot. Bitch, I'm always at the guala, yeah, and you are not badass beat. Keep on going till you hit the spot. Whoa, I'm a big bag hunter with the bow. She got a big bed, never drop it low. Never ever fall for a thotty, that's an oath.
Since its inception, the Niche Zero was an easy recommendation as the go-to home espresso grinder. But in recent years, it faced competition, making the Zero a worse and worse bang-for-buck option. With YouTubers banking on the niche killer tagline, Niche needed to step up. April Fool's Day 2023, Niche has oddly decided to quietly launch the new Niche Duo. Now this video is going to cover my thoughts about this grinder, having used it for about 2 months now, how it compares to other grinders I've used in the past, and ultimately if I personally think that it's worth it. But this also begs the greater question of what makes a grinder worth it. To me, there are 4 things that make a grinder worth it. One of them is the build quality. I don't need a grinder that's going to rip through 18-gram doses 50 times per hour. I need a grinder that's going to reliably do maybe 50 grams-ish of coffee per day and not fail on me over a short period of time. It doesn't need to be built like an EK43, but should feel like it will last for home use. This grinder is practically identical to the original Niche Zero, but bigger. You have the same chassis, the same glossy black exterior, and the same oak wood accents. Now, truth be told, there was nothing really wrong with the original Zero's design or the new Duo's design. But for $1,100 USD, I would have liked to see more premium materials used. Maybe some new finishes or colors at the very least. Now hold on a sec, I did mention for $1,100 US, but that was at the time I paid for this grinder. Shortly after its release, Niche decided to drop the price and give you the option of one of the 2 burr sets that it comes with. I'll come back to that later. Now in this grinder you have the same stepless adjustment ring being used on the Duo, which I personally love, and I still think it's one of the best integrated adjustment mechanisms of any grinder. Out of the box, the grinder did come installed with the espresso burrs, which have been aligned quite well to also zero out at the 0 setting on the Duo dial ring. The inner assembly of the grinder seems to remain more or less the same, opting for 83mm flat burrs instead of the smaller 63mm conicals found on the original Zero. I would also highly recommend watching the Wired Gourmet's in-depth review of the Niche Duo, where he really gets into the nitty-gritty, really tearing this grinder apart. Overall, the quality is good. I expect it to hold up just fine in any at-home environment, but definitely would not expect it to use this for a commercial setting. The second important quality in the grinder for me is workflow. A clean and consistent workflow is important for me. I don't want to deal with chaff and other grounds spilling everywhere, and the original Zero remained almost unmatched in that regard. Now retention here on the Duo is good. I typically do end up within a 0.1 to 0.2 gram range of my dose. I have noticed that a little bit of RDT does help with the static buildup, but can also make retention just a little bit worse. I've been using this little rubber tool I got off Amazon to act as sort of like a bellows system for this grinder, and I used it on the original Zero as well. I found that this, alongside the RDT, works really well. And while this grinder does have a nice and clean workflow, I do wish it had the same deionizer tech that's featured in grinders like the Fellow Ode and the Akai Orbit to really further eliminate chaff. Now the next most important variable in a grinder for me is taste, obviously the #1 variable when it comes to choosing a home coffee grinder. It needs to perform well in its advertised capability, either fully filter, fully espresso, or a mix of both. For a Duo, it's really a mix of both, as the name might imply. This grinder is awesome. Back when I initially reviewed the DF83, I've always thought about how if I could get the performance of the 83 and a clean workflow of a grinder like the Zero at a reasonable price point, that's it, I'm done. And this grinder just about checks off all of those boxes for me. With the large 83mm flat burrs, I found I'm getting brews and shots with great clarity, with fruity notes really pulling through in the cup. This grinder emphasizes the juicy and more intricate, delicate tastes out of light roasts, while still giving a great classic syrupy shot with darker roasts, perfect for milky drinks. The large stepless range of dialing in for both the filter and espresso burrs really help in dialing in different types of beans, whether you're pulling a lightly roasted Kona bean from Hawaii or a darker washed Ethiopian for espresso. And the Niche Duo really achieved all of that with the classic clean workflow of the original Zero, also not needing to use RDT much, if at all, and performing quite well in regards to retention. Filter brews are pretty comparable to the DF83, with the 83 possibly falling into the ever so slightly more muddy end than the Niche, and I suspect that's probably due to the higher RPM creating more fines when grinding. And last and certainly not least, the fourth important variable for me in a grinder is price. Now, what other grinders or features can you get for the same money? Coming back to the discussion on this grinder's price point. Now, at the time I purchased it, as I mentioned before, it was a whopping $1,100 after shipping and import fees. This did also include both burr sets, but since then, Niche decided to drop the price to about $700-ish for a single burr set and closer to about $800 to $850 for both. Now that makes it a much more compelling option in my opinion compared to its original price, and it's especially comparable to grinders like the DF83, which usually hovers around the $600 to $700-ish price point. And with this new price point, I really do think this grinder is worth the money. And as much as I do love this grinder so far, it's not without its faults. Most obvious is the inclusion of having to use two burr sets for filter and espresso. While a nice to have, it would have been nice to see a single burr set capable of both espresso and filter, because realistically, I have not been swapping the burrs on this grinder. To be fair, I do have multiple grinders lying around that I can use and have one dedicated to filter and one dedicated to espresso, so I really don't need to swap the burrs on the Duo. But honestly, in reality, I just don't find it practical to swap between the espresso burrs and the filter burrs on a day-to-day basis. It's great if you happen to stick to one or maybe have periods of time going for espresso, then back to filter, but day-to-day, it's just not happening. The Niche Duo is great. This grinder really feels like it's literally just a scaled up version of the original Zero with 83mm flat burrs, and that's a really good thing. So anyway, those are going to be my thoughts on the new Niche Duo, as well as my criteria for a perfect home coffee grinder. Hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to drop a like if you did, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.